Hello and welcome back to Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra over at d1baseball.com. I'm your host, Joe Healy, joined as always by my good friend and co-host, Mark Etheridge. We are continuing our series of SEC team preview podcasts. Today, we're going to talk about the Tennessee Volunteers, which, last year got to Omaha. Second time in 3 years, Tennessee has been to Omaha, and the 1 year they didn't make it, you may remember, they were the best team in college baseball and just kind of ran into a buzzsaw in Notre Dame. But quite a little run Tennessee is on here, so we'll jump into how likely it is that they continue that run, or if they're due for a step back or something in between. We will dice that up here in a second. But first, I have to let you know that this episode of Highway to Hoover and every episode of Highway to Hoover is brought to you by Pitch Logic, the system used by players, coaches, scouts, and instructors at all levels of play, from youth leagues to the big leagues. The easy-to-use and affordable technology makes the platform accessible to every player at every level. All the metrics and features used at the highest level. See pitchlogic.com for more information. I redeemed myself after I flubbed on the South Carolina episode on the ad read. Just
You're on the street now.
Totally redeemed myself. So Tennessee last season, 44-22 overall, 16-14 in SEC play. They were the most dangerous 2 seed in the field and bore that out by winning a regional and then winning a super regional, breaking the hearts of Southern Miss fans along the way. Scott Berry, that's right, you were in Scott Berry's last year at the helm and into their season in the College World Series again. And, frankly, that rundown doesn't totally give you the true picture of their season. It was kind of a wild season. At one point, they were, 5-10 in SEC play? Is that right? Something like that? Yeah. And we were starting to have conversations of like, hey, this, could this team miss regionals? And then, lo and behold, they make some tweaks. They move some guys in and out. I think most famously, they shuffle the rotation, Chase Burns to the bullpen, Andrew Lindsay into the rotation, and the rest is kind of history, because all that stuff kind of took, if you will. And so they go into this year with a decent bit of turnover again. And I think that I bring that up in large part because I think that's part of what we underestimated last year was, we'd seen Tennessee kind of go seamlessly from, they looked pretty good early in 2020, but then we know what happened there. But then in 2021, they go to Omaha, they lose some guys from that team. They come back in 2022 and they were better. And so it's like, okay, they lose guys after that season. It's like, okay, they're not going to go 25-5 in conference play again, but we had them as the preseason number 2 last year. They'll still be great. And then it just took them a while. So I think this year we have a little bit of a different perspective and expectation for them. I mean, look, we still have them in the top 10. We think it's a very good team, but I do think we have maybe a little more respect for this program is really humming along right now, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be a turnkey operation and they'll immediately run out there and be this juggernaut of a team just because we think they should.
Right. Well, you remember last year, everyone remembers, they go to Missouri and they drop all three games that weekend. But, they were preseason number 2, as you mentioned, behind an LSU team and we were calling the super. They lost 2 out of 3 opening weekend. I mean, and Maui Ahuna was suspended, if you remember all that. So it was just kind of a weird year, especially from the start. But boy, when they figured it out, they figured it out. And at the end of the year, really from May on, they were playing as well as anybody. They just had such a big hole to climb out of. So I think that how that parallels to this year is there are some similar questions where you have new players coming in different spots, having to replace a lot of production, either pitching wise certainly, but even some offensively too. And how is that all going to shake out? And I don't think anyone's too worried that by May they're going to figure it out again, right? But you just don't want to. You don't want to crawl out of a hole in May. You want to be already in a good spot, and then you turn it on, and then you're a top 8 seed, right? And your team playing at home, and that's a great home environment. They would be a tough team to knock off at home, and I think that even as they prove that it doesn't matter, they can still win on the road as they did last year. But boy, wouldn't you rather have that home crowd, that home experience, right? So I think, for me is, what kind of start are they going to get? how do some of these new players, I mean, Cannon Peebles, Billy Amick, you know, Dalton Bargo, some of these guys who've done it other places who are going to come in if they step in and flourish, and some of the holdovers can continue their development. This is going to be a really good offense. Okay, so I think I feel pretty confident about their offense. Then you look at the pitching staff and Drew Beam. He's a known commodity, but he's moving into that Friday role where he's been he's been one of the best pitchers in the league the last two seasons, but he hadn't had to be the guy. So this is a great opportunity for him, to have that limelight and to match up with some of the best pitchers in the conference. And then, what does it look like behind him? I think, there's plenty of options. And I think, this is where I think you could see some churn, right? And as they try to find the right pitchers for the right roles and see who can give them what they need.
Yeah, I'm intrigued by what they get on the mound behind Beam. That to me is question number one. I think in part just because we've become so accustomed to seeing that rotation for 2 years, really, at least the first half of last year, it was in some order, Dollander, Burns, and Beam. And so Beam kind of gets zoomed up to the number one spot. And he's as ready for that as anybody in college baseball, so I don't anticipate necessarily being a lot different, but I will say being a Friday guy is different, although sometimes I think that gets a little bit overblown, but he's a different pitcher than Dollander and Burns. His stuff is good. He's a legitimate prospect. I don't want to slight him in that regard, but he's historically been more of a pitch to contact guy, a soft contact guy. Not necessarily pitch to contact, but he tends to get a lot of soft contact. His strikeout numbers aren't as high as Burns and Dollander's were. He's a little more hittable. Now he's also a little bit steadier in some regard than certainly Chase Burns was at times, right? I mean, last year Chase Burns you didn't know what you were going to get when the first half of the season when he was in the rotation, and even Dollander last year to some degree. So Burns might be kind of the steadiest heartbeat guy of that group, but he's not typically as dominant. So if he's the same guy, that's great. I mean, you've still got a really good Friday guy, but I don't know, what if he's turned things up a notch? What if he's missing more bats? What if he's a little more dominant? That will be interesting to see if it plays out that way. I'm intrigued by options behind him, though they are unproven. I really liked what I saw from AJ Russell last year. I mean, the numbers are frankly kind of incredible. And it was a lot of midweek stuff, a lot of low leverage stuff early in the year, but I saw him in person throw a bunch against Georgia late in the year last year. And it was like, he was ready to be a high leverage guy. Now he's going to get his opportunity, but he really, really looks the part. I don't have a ton of cause for concern there, but the third spot is kind of interesting to me. I like AJ Causey, the Jacksonville State transfer. It's a funky slot. It's a pretty firm fastball, but the big deal with him is a super high spin breaking ball that's really nasty when it's on. But he's a guy that had a 5 ERA last year at Jacksonville State. They play in a good league, but it's not the SEC. So was that an anomaly? Is he a better pitcher now? That could be possible too, right? Frank Anderson, one of the best pitching coaches in the country. So it's just possible he's a better pitcher now than he was a year ago. I don't want to discount that, but they have Xander Sechrist kind of waiting in the wings. I mean, you talk about experience, doesn't get much more experience than him, other than Kirby Cannell, who's still on this team,
still there
as a lefty specialist,
pitching to one hitter, right?
Right, exactly, one hitter at a time. Yeah, and he's great at it. You know what? God bless him. But you've got Sechrist, a guy with some experience there, but ultimately, I wouldn't be surprised if that third spot ends up being fluid for a while. And even the second spot, if Russell's not, great out of the gate, although I have a pretty high level of confidence he's going to be all right there. But, what they get behind Beam to me is question number one for this team.
Right. I totally agree. And I'm really, I guess, curious to see the role Marcus Phillips plays. I mean, he's the JC transfer who could be the closer, or if we talked about maybe Causey or Russell, or Lord forbid there's an injury or something, he could be a guy who you might want to stretch out. right? Certainly the stuff is there. Great athlete, can be a difference maker. Um, but you think about, you got a guy like that who's going to be really competitive, and you love a guy like that in the closer role, don't you? I mean, just a guy who's going to come in and want the ball in the clutch, the clutch moment. So that's kind of an X factor for me. What is his role? Is he going to be the closer, or is he going to help you in other ways? And I think the other thing with Tennessee is they've always, I mean, the last really few years, they probably had more pitchers than they needed. Okay, so we talked about AJ Russell was ready for an enhanced role, and there just wasn't one available because there were so many other guys you're trying to get work to. So maybe having a little bit less depth may allow some guys to blossom and elevate. And and you don't want to say that out loud sometimes, but maybe it's hard to keep everybody happy and everybody sharp. So maybe if you're trying to use 10 guys instead of 14, this is that might work out.
One guy I want to mention too before we move on to the position player side is the best freshman arm I saw this fall was Derek Schaefer, who's a kid out of Arizona, kind of a big physical guy, just a lot of mound presence. The stuff is good too, but he looked like a veteran on the mound pitching against Virginia Tech. And I get it. It's the fall. It's not as high, high intensity as it will be during the spring, but he was a guy that really stood out to me. And if there's a freshman on the staff that has a chance to jump into a big role right away, I think it's him. So that's one more name to watch out for there. On the position player side, I think the most interesting group for me is the outfield, where they're looking at maybe, Dylan Dreiling, who was good in a small sample last year. The key for him is, can he hit lefties? He really didn't bat against lefties at all last season, but put up good overall numbers. Can he be an everyday guy now? Hunter Inslee played really well in center field last year. I wrote a story about him midway through the year last year because he had kind of locked down that center field job. Not the toolsiest guy, not the most exciting player, not really a prospect, just a really nice, gritty, hard-nosed player, kind of in the Tennessee mold, right? Just the guys they've started to churn out with regularity there. And then Kavares Tears is another guy to watch there. He had from everything coming out of there, he had a big fall. Now, the one game I saw against Virginia Tech, he struck out 4 times and looked lost against breaking stuff. Bad day, or, a harbinger of things to come. I mean, that'll remain to be seen, but certainly super toolsy. No argument there. Like I think they would love for him to be a guy who figures it out this year. It's
right.
Big time power is kind of the thing offensively that stands out about him. And he could be a superstar if he puts it all together, but there is some swing and miss there. How does he handle that? So the outfield to me is on the position player side, what I'm looking at first as having a lot of control over how good is this Tennessee team offensively.
Mm-hmm. And I think those are your lineup depth when we're talking about, maybe guys who aren't going to hit, 1 through 5, although they might, right? But you, in order to stretch out leads, in order to run up pitch counts, you need those guys 6, 7, 8, sometimes 9 to give you those competitive at bats and to stretch that lineup out and turn a 1-run inning into a 3 and a 4-run inning. And I think that's where, for me, that's where I see that happening. I think for Tennessee, the biggest question positionally is shortstop. Will it be the freshman Antigua?
Once he comes back from injury, he's out for a few weeks early in the season. So they're going to be without him for a little bit, but he had been someone tracking to maybe lock down that job as a freshman. Now, maybe still, but it'll take a little bit of time.
Yeah. So, or is Christian Moore gonna be there? And if he does, and he sticks there defensively, then wow. I mean, it gives you one of your stars, and he moves into a premium position, right? So versatile guy, one of the best best, most exciting players. I'll call him in the league because he's fun to watch. Man, he's all over the place. I think Blake Burke is an interesting guy for me. Just light tower power, perfect fit for that ballpark, and it's not like he needs to hit cheap home runs, but boy, can he! It's almost unfair, him hitting there. So can he do more than just be the power guy? Because the talent's there. If he's able to, he hit 279 last year. If he hits 330, just think what his run production numbers will be. So that to me was one of the keys for the season is can he be that guy?
Yeah, I mean, last year we've talked about this before, but last year in SEC play, frankly, it wasn't good. I mean, he hit 211, 5 home runs in SEC play.
Mm-hmm.
One of the lower among regulars, the only regular with a lower batting average in SEC play was Cal Stark, who was not, really was not a top offensive guy for Tennessee. So, so that's a great point by you, because the numbers overall look okay. Okay, 279, you'd like that to be higher, but he hit 16 bombs, so you're like, okay, that's a nice year. But it's a little more complicated than that. So one other guy we haven't mentioned is Billy Amick, the Clemson transfer. Maybe we've mentioned him in passing, but we haven't dug in on him. Guy can really hit. I mean, a really good story last year at Clemson was a guy who really wasn't in the lineup early in the season, but once he got in the lineup, he stuck around and put up incredible numbers. And it's important to remember, you look at the numbers he put up last year, and that's in about 2/3 of the total games he could have started in. So those counting totals, I think it was 17 doubles, 13 bombs, could have been 20 and 15 or 17 pretty easily. So really impressive hitter, really good feel to hit. Obviously he's got some strength. I think his power will play well in that ballpark. There are questions about him defensively. I'm not as worried about that as some others are. Certainly not as worried about as MLB scouts are, but of course they're doing a different job than what we're doing here.
Yeah.
I think he'll ultimately be fine. Infield wise, if let's say with Antigua being out, you move Christian Moore to shortstop, or even if you don't, a couple of the guys to watch there that are talented who I like. One is Brad Keylori, who's a JC transfer who played for the national title winning College of Central Florida last year. Didn't see him in the fall. He was not with the team, or he was on the team, but he did not play in the Virginia Tech scrimmage. So I have not seen him with my own eyes, but he's a well-regarded recruit from the JUCO ranks, one of the best JUCO transfers to end up in the SEC. The comp the Tennessee coaching staff puts on him is Seth Stevenson from a couple of years ago, who was, a versatile guy, good athlete, could run. So it's that kind of profile. Also, Alex Perry, another JUCO transfer, good body. Again, a versatile guy, could certainly play second base. Could play third base if they push Amick somewhere else. Has some physicality, can run the ball at the ballpark a little bit. So I do like some of the depth options they have. So you say, oh gosh, you lost a guy who could have been the starting shortstop as a freshman. That must be a real blow. And, they prefer that not be the case, but they do have some depth options on the infield that I really like. So that's good news there. And the final thing is we mentioned Cannon Peebles a little bit. Wasn't a full-time catcher last year at NC State. Now, in fairness to him, I think that's less because they were repulsed by what they saw from him defensively and more that he was behind Jacob Cozart, who is, one of the best 2 or 3 catchers in the country. Yeah. So that just matters. A tough break. Yeah. So how does he handle full-time catching? I think we're confident he's going to hit, but it's been a while since Tennessee has felt great about its catching position. With the situation they had a couple of years ago where they really didn't have a traditional catcher. Last year they caught Cal Stark a lot, who's still around, but will be most likely a backup. So Peebles, if he can really handle the position, and if he can hit like he hit last year at NC State, for the first time in a while, Tennessee probably has to feel really good about what it has behind the plate.
Right. And plus they added Dalton Bargo from Missouri, who can play a lot of different places, right?
For sure. Yeah. I mean, he's kind of a forgotten guy here, but yeah, it's a guy who swung the bat pretty well at Missouri last year for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I do think that, being able to, if Amick is able to be that guy in the middle of the lineup, which all indications, he will be, and Burke he takes that next step. I mean, this lineup will be, that it's going to be really challenging to pitch to. And I guess the last thing on the balls is, last year was such a roller coaster year because the expectations were so high after, the year before, and just dominant regular season, and then not making it to Omaha when, it was kind of Tennessee versus the field, right? 2 years ago for the postseason. And then last year you don't even host, but you get back, the year after the big year is you get to the College World Series. So now what happens? Okay. You've had the year where, you shocked everybody that you became this juggernaut. And then that was expected because you have to do that every year because that's what expectations are, right? But you don't in the regular season, and then you shoot up and you have the year that you should have had the year before, right? You made it to the Final Four. So what does this year do? Because the expectations are high, but not like last year. But the team, I don't know. I mean, the team to me, if the pitching gets figured out, it could be a really similar type of club to last year. And maybe the offense is a little bit better, and you don't have those early losses. You don't have that hole that you've got to climb out of. So you're in a better position for the postseason, and the program is viewed differently, right? So I think that's a really interesting, because I love to think about program trajectories and who's trending in the right direction and maybe who's not. And this is a volunteer program that, Tony's turned it into, a destination, right, for transfers, because they're in the big fish pond, right? They're getting all these guys that could go anywhere. And I think a big part of that is being able to be successful year after year. And this is a great opportunity to keep building on that upward trend.
Totally agree. Yeah, I mean, so many things working in their favor right now. They're obviously the results in the field. They're recruiting well, both in a traditional sense and in the portal. They have upgrades coming to Lindsey Nelson Stadium. Although I think when you have a chance to make upgrades, you have to make them. But I do think there will be something maybe lost when they do upgrade the stadium a little bit, because right now the facility itself is not anything to really write home about in terms of the looks, the aesthetics, and all that. But home games right now in Knoxville are as close as we have to South American soccer matches in terms of just a wall of sound and kind of antagonistic home crowds in a beautiful way, like just a fun atmosphere where the crowd is just right on top of the field. It feels like so.
Yeah, they impact the game.
Absolutely, and I hope whatever the next version of Lindsey Nelson Stadium looks like, they don't lose that feeling. So even as it gets a little more posh, which they deserve. I mean, the success they've had, they deserve to have some better digs. But hopefully, it is just as fun as what's happening at Lindsey Nelson right now. So that is going to do it for this edition of Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra over at d1baseball.com. If you are a Tennessee fan who just came in for this one episode, we appreciate you joining us, but we would urge you to go back and listen to all of our previous SEC team preview episodes and hang around for the last couple of episodes we have on SEC programs heading up to opening day. We will have done 14 episodes by the time it is all said and done, one for each club. And whatever podcast app you are looking at or using, give us 5 stars, give us a review, give us a thumbs up, give us whatever it is your podcast app wants you to do to let other people know that they should jump on board as we get ready for the 2024 season. And I do a poor job at this, but I should do this more often. If you're not a subscriber, we'd be humbled if you'd give us a try. Mark and I are working hard. We're hard at the lab, as they would say, coming up with some new stuff to bring you guys for the 2024 season. Use code 24season at checkout to get 24% off of an annual subscription for either D1 Baseball more generally or for SEC Extra specifically. Either one works for us there. But again, if you're not a subscriber, we would love it if you jump in and give us a shot to take you through the 2024 season. So thank you, listeners, for listening. Thank you to Pitch Logic for sponsoring this and every episode of Highway to Hoover. And thank you, Mark, as always, for joining me.